Chapter 1. Thud. The sound of flesh hitting dirt and bones cracking broke the otherwise silent dusk in the graveyard. The impact of a body falling from an unknown height and crashing into the ground caused the nightlife to skitter away in fear. The crescent moon grinned down at the scene, casting its bluish light onto the unmoving body. The figure stood, groaning as joints and muscles contorted from an unlivable position, spine and rib cage rejoining in a sickening symphony of snaps and crackles. With a twist of his head, the impossible survivor righted himself, and looked at the sky from whence he came. "So help me, I will get you back for that," he said in exasperation, knocking some dirt from his ear. Yellow and blue eyes blinked in the moonlight, taking in his surroundings. Now, where the hellheim did he throw me? Running was interesting. His mind knew how, his body knew how, but when his mind told his body to put one foot in front of the other, it had a hasty fashion. The result was a broken and reattached shin snapping under the sudden movement and ending up in a faceplant right into a large tombstone. The pitiful moan of someone who just screwed up twice in a row was lost under the squishy crunch noise of his face being flattened against the slab of stone. After a few minutes of self-contemplation, the figure grabbed the tombstone and used it to heft himself up to his shaky feet. "Okay. Do not try and run after you fall from stupid high up and your body is remembering how to keep it all together. Gotcha." Turning, he slumped against the slab, his breathing slow as he tried to collect his thoughts, few as they were. Amnesia was something that annoyed him. Not so much that he'd forgotten everything in his life up till recently. He was surprisingly cool with that. No, amnesia bugged him because he felt like a cheap beginning of a book or something. Regardless of how he felt about tropes and literature, the figure took this moment to assess his condition. All of his limbs were still attached and neither working or in the process of starting to work. He wasn't dead, though he was sure he should have been. A quick check of his pulse confirmed that his heart was still beating, so not a zombie. Absent-mindedly, he took a look at his left hand, noticing the pale skin in the moonlight. He then looked at his right hand, which was less pale and more fleshy-colored. That's weird. Pushing himself up, slowly this time, the figure dusted the dirt off his clothes and looked down at the grave he'd been lounging on top of. "Mr. Trent Ferryman, I thank you for your service to mankind." With a slight salute and a wobbly step, Trent walked down the path of the graveyard, his new name as fresh on him as the tilled dirt. The moon provided some light, but not a lot. A few trees adorned the path leading away from the cemetery, but as he continued further down the trodden road, more trees surrounded him and obscured the sky. However, oddly enough, he could see perfectly fine. The shadows and lack of light seemed less shrouding than he knew it should be. Trent blinked and rubbed his eyes, his vision seeming to flicker between night vision and standard sight. Experimenting, he closed one eye and then the other, looking at the path before him with each eye independently. His left eye turned the forest into a strange negative version of itself, the dark sky bright as day, the light seeming to be a whitish void. It was like looking through a night vision goggles, only instead of a green tinge, there was a yellowish haze. Having both eyes open looked like the world was like looking at the world through weird 3D glasses. Ahead, the path split in two, and without much thought, Trent took the left path. He could see the trees starting to thin, the forest beginning to break away around him. It wasn't obvious at first, but as he approached the edge of the forest, Trent saw that the trees were starting to bend backwards. First, it was a slight angle to the trees, but as he stepped over a root and under a bush, the trees began to had either grown horizontal or half uprooted, like some sort of explosion had knocked the trees almost out of the ground. Stepping onto the clearing, his feet touched scorched earth. Even in the moonlight and the weird night vision, Trent could see all around him the aftermath of some great blast. The ground was desolate. Nothing grew for as far as he could see up to the forest edge. The air tasted of bleach, an almost metallic sterile tang that burned at his nose. And something just felt off about this place as well, like something really bad had happened. Shaking himself, Trent continued forward, his eyes looking across the flattened landscape around him. It felt eerily familiar to him for some reason. Above, the night sky had the almost crystal blue colors bleeding into the sky, but oddly enough there was no sun yet. Curious, he followed the traces of light in the sky down towards the horizon. In the distance ahead, he saw a mountain that rose high and obscured the sunrise from him. Any minute now, the sun would rise up high enough to light the landscape. As he continued forth, the mountain seemed to change, looking less rocky and more like a massive structure. But it wasn't possible. Something that huge, that high up, defied whatever thoughts of common sense still rattled around his admittedly empty head. But the more he walked and the closer he got, it began to look more and more like a giant city, built straight up into the air. As the sun crested the whatever it was in front of him, Trent lifted his arm to block the light from his eyes. A searing pain burned into his arm, the pale flesh catching fire and the sunlight shining through the holes in his bones. His left eye caught fire and the blinding white pain brought him to his knees as the top left chunk of his torso was turning to ash and bone in the dawn sun. Trent collapsed, his good eye glazing over and showing spots as a good third of him began to disintegrate.